Welcome. This is going to be part two of Terraform Foundations. So we're just going to get right back into it. We're going to be covering a few more concepts today. Last time we spoke about state. We spoke about some of the basic commands that we use. We spoke about resources. We spoke about outputs. But now I want to make it a bit more sophisticated to build on top of that foundation that we just laid. So let's take a look at our main.tf. So here we have resources, which we're familiar with from the first video. We have our variable, which we've already seen. We're seeing some new things kind of go on over here. So we see this each piece. We're also seeing this for each component, which we're going to talk about in a second. We also see this kind of thing, kind of looks like a function. We'll talk about that. But overall, we're familiar with resources. So let's actually start here. The data query is a really useful capability that's built into Terraform. What it allows you to do is just query some resource. Each provider implements different kinds of data queries. So for instance, with AWS, you can data query an EC2 instance. For the local provider, you can actually just data query files and grab the file and get its file contents. We're going to be using that here. Let's take a look at this for each. So this is one of the iteration concepts that Terraform has. So if you're familiar with other programming languages, Python, for example, you've probably seen for loops or where loops. So this is one of the looping constructs that's offered. We're going to be iterating through this specific variable here. And I will actually kind of show you what this variable looks like because that'll kind of inform what's going on. So this variable is a bit of a departure from some of the earlier variables that we saw. The first variables that we were looking at in the original video, they were kind of straightforward. They had one type, and that was it, right? So, in that case, they were type string, but they can also be type bool, for true, false, all that kind of stuff. Here, this is a much more flexible variable. So it's a map of objects. And what does that actually look like? What is the visual representation of this? So I'm going to go back over here to the left, and we can open up our Terraform TFRs file. And now we have an idea of what this looks like. So left and right, we can go through it. We see that there are two blocks in here. We have our hello block, hello2 block. These are actually representing the files that we want to create. And within this, we have some keys. So file path, file name, file content, keeping the same string as I did in the first video. I'll remake the point again here, but I'll just keep it for consistency. File permission. And now we could define another block over here called hello2. And it has, the same kind of configuration variables, the content slightly different. And I'll explain what this file from base piece does in a second. But if we look at the left and then look at the right, we can kind of see how this is mapping out. At the top level, we have the name of the variable called file config. And then within it, we see effectively our map. And then inside of here, we see the keys defined in the objects that are going on. Why use this? This is a really powerful way to define your variable. As you can kind of see on the right side, we have some variables defined as strings, but then we have other ones defined as Booleans. And this really allows you to have a ton of flexibility in terms of how you want to define stuff, right? You can create blocks like this that define a configuration for an EC2 instance, for a VPC. And the power of this is it helps you kind of logically bundle all those settings together and pass it around, to the different resources that you want to create. So another thing that you see over here on the file config side is this optional keyword. This is a later addition, but it's ultra useful. Effectively, what optional allows you to do, like I mentioned, make the entire parameter optional. So as you can see on the left side with hello, I don't have to pass file from base. It's not required. Now, I'm also supplying a default value for this optional parameter. That isn't strictly necessary, but in this case, I am passing it. Same thing, I'm doing optional for the string piece here for file path and then providing a default value, as well as a description for what the variable is. And now that we have this new kind of data structure that we're dealing with that we can use, let's take a look at our main.tf again, right? Now we have this for each. So we're iterating through that map. So what does this look like in terms of the iteration process? Well, we're going to start with that first configuration block. And then we reference the keys of it by doing each.value.key. So let me bring up on the right side over here that Terraform TF vars. and we can kind of walk through this. So file config is the variable. The first stop in the iteration is hello. Then we kind of take a look over here and we see each.value.filePath, I have that variable defined, so that's going to be output. We see each.value.filename right over there, that's defined. And then you just reference in that way. Over here, what is this contains doing? That is what's called a Terraform function. So Terraform functions, there's tons of them. This specific one will tell me, given a list, if my value is inside of that list. So in this case, I'm taking the file name and I'm saying, hey, is my file name in this from base array? And if not, do this logic. So where is this from base array coming from? Let's go to locals. So what we see here is a local block. It's super useful for intermediate data preprocessing. So if you want to take a variable in, run some transformations on it or parse it, you're going to be doing that in the locals block most likely. Another super handy tool that you can use in Terraform is this list comprehension style setup over here, if you're familiar with Python. So we're saying for key and value in our var.file config. So if we're thinking about this in terms of the structure over here, that's for hello would be the key, and these would be our values. And we'll go over here and we see v.file from base. We see that as well over there. Now, what is this question mark? What is this stuff going on over here? Okay, so if we have v.file from base with the question mark, this is effectively our conditional operator. So conditional is, our if then, but within Terraform, useful in tons of different places. And effectively what's going on here is saying if file from base is defined, if it's true, put the file name. And if not, just put null or nothing. And what this array will come out to is it will show us the name of all the files that say build me from base. And that's how we kind of construct this array. It's a super powerful tool that we have at our disposal in Terraform. And now we can actually see that logic present over here in content. So what is this all wrapped together? We're doing a check that says, hey, on this particular key value pair, does the file name have file from base defined? Is it in the list of such files? If it is, then what I'm going to want to do is take the contents of our file that we got from our data query, which is our base file, and then add that, put that at the top, and then we're going to put our own file contents in there. And if not, we're just going to use the file contents that we passed. And then finally, we have the file permission. So all together here, we're kind of creating a few different directions that we can kind of go in. In our initial file that we set up in file config, we don't have a base. So we're just going to be creating a file with that file content string. However, in the second file, we're going to be using this base file that has some, text in it, right? So what does this look like when we're running? We run our Terraform plan. So we're going to be creating two files. We have our initial file over here, no base, and then we have this one. And let's take a look at that base file. So here's our base file, base.txt. It says, I have a story to tell, and we see that being put at the top, and then our context is appended at the bottom. So let's go ahead and create it. Boom, done. And now we can check out our output. We see we have two files. Check out hello.txt. There we go, what we've expected. And there we go, we have our second file. And it has that piece appended to it. So there we see that not only have we created two files, we were able to specify their configuration by a variable defined here. And not only that, but the actual variables themselves, as we see here, are compact, easy to read, and easy to define. Another really large benefit of this with using for each is that it frees you from having to define the resource multiple times. What this allows you to do is just say, hey, I have a bunch of resources I want to create. The configuration for each of those resources is semi-advanced. And now what I want to do is define these resources in my variables and create them all in one shot. And again, that's what this allows you to do. I'm always going to make a note of this. As you can see with Terraform.tf state, it is kept as a flat file. It's being kept locally as a flat file because I'm using the local state provider. Always keep in mind that Terraform state is not encrypted locally. And for this example, that's how I'm using it. But if you are planning to use Terraform in a production setting, you should set your backend to a remote backend and one that supports encryption at rest. Thank you for your time.